I'm Carolina with Always Expect More and 30-Minute Crafts, and today we are going to quilt this quilt. I have another video that's already up that shows you how to walking foot quilt the quilt. So if you're an absolute beginner at quilting but you just want to get your quilt finished, you probably want to check out that video. That video will show you step by step how to use a walking foot, which is a super beginner friendly way to quilt your quilt. It also shows you how to pin baste your quilt and square it up. In this video, I'm actually going to show you how to spray baste your quilt with basting spray, then free motion quilt it, and then trim it up. Now, if you are walking foot quilting your quilt, you can still use basting spray. Absolutely. I love basting spray. It's so much faster than using pins. There's a couple times that you might not want to use basting spray. Basting spray is chemicals, and if you're sensitive at all about chemicals in the air, it might not be for you, especially if you're pregnant or you or someone in your family has some kind of respiratory problem. It's often great to use outside, especially when you are doing a larger project, so you're spraying a lot, or you're in an area where you don't want any of the overspray of the adhesive. I might have a couple spots on my rug where I've oversprayed the adhesive and they're now sticky and have all kinds of gunk stuck to them. So that happens as well. Also, some people won't use a basting spray if they're making a baby quilt for a baby because they don't want those chemicals to be in the quilt when they gift the quilt. Or if they do use a basting spray before gifting the quilt, they wash it. Now, I'm not an expert on chemicals or the way those chemicals work. That's just some information that I have that I thought might be valuable to you. So we're going to go ahead and get this quilt started. I've got my backing fabric. That's a 7/8 yard that I've squared up. I've got some batting. You can get a crib size or craft size batting that you can use. And I have my quilt top. I have them all pressed and flat so we can spray baste this together. In the video where I showed you how to quilt using a walking foot, I had the other quilt that I made. That's the one that's on alwaysexpectmore.com. This is the quilt that I've been putting together here on YouTube. I use 2 different colored fabric collections. So this is it all put together with those sashings and the borders. The quilt top is done. I'm going to set this aside. And I have it pressed, so I want to be careful with it and just gently fold it up so I don't put any extra wrinkles in it. So we'll just set that up there. Then I have a piece of batting. This is Fairfield 100% cotton. I talk a little bit about batting in the other video as well. Basically, I say go for a low loft batting. A low loft batting means it's not really thick. We don't want a thick batting because that's just harder to feed underneath the machine. I know puffy, big, fun quilts sound fun, but they are so much more challenging when you're trying to put it together. So I recommend a low loft batting. I like 100% cotton or like an 80-20, which is 80% cotton, 20% polyester as a blend. Those are great. Some people like wool batting. They say that wool batting lies really flat. I'm allergic to wool, so wool's not an option for me. Fairfield has a batting that's actually a green batting. It's a slight color green, and it's made out of recycled bottles, and I love that batting. I think that that has a great drape and is very smooth as well. It's just not sold on big rolls. It's only sold in packages. So that's another option for batting. But this is just Fairfield 100% cotton batting, and it's what I use in most of my quilts. I'm going to set this aside for just 1 second. And then this is my backing fabric. I bought 7/8 of a yard, and I cut it to be a little bit bigger than my quilt top. So if I place my quilt top on top of here, you can see for a large quilt, you want about 4 inches around. This is a small quilt, so I was looking for about 2 inches on either side. And that gives me enough space so that I can quilt on beyond the borders and make sure that everything lies flat. So I've cut this down, and I also have it, right now I have this pretty side down because I want to put my batting on top of this. Now there is a little bit of controversy about which way should you baste your quilt. Should you put the basting spray on the fabric and put the batting on top of that? Some people say that's better because the fabric is less porous. However, sometimes I get little clumps of basting spray because I don't use a full can, and I don't know, different sprays, different kinds. I've gotten little clumps, and I feel like the porous of the batting is better. Also, I feel like it's easier to put the fabric on top of the batting than the batting onto the fabric. But that's just my personal preference. So I'm going to move this out of the way and put the batting back. And now I'm going to spray my adhesive. You probably want to protect your work surface. My work surface has been pretty beat up, so I'm okay with it. But you do want to make sure that you don't get a lot of overspray and move anything that's valuable or important so it doesn't get any overspray. So I'm going to spray my adhesive. You probably want to protect your work surface. My work surface has been pretty beat up, so I'm okay with it. But you do want to make sure that you don't get a lot of overspray and move anything that's valuable or important so it doesn't get any overspray. So it doesn't get any overspray. With a larger quilt, I would do this in sections, but this is just a small little quilt. So I can just spray the whole thing and gently put my fabric on top. This is kind of like the same thing that we did when we put our fabric on the Cricut mat. It's just that floating the fabric over the top and then securing it down. Just gently putting it in place. Perfect. Now I'm going to flip it over and do the same with the quilt top. Let me get my quilt top ready. And if there's any stray threads, I want to remove those because I don't want those inside my quilt, which is what will happen. All right, this quilt top is basted and we're ready to take it to the sewing machine. I'm still using my same machine. This is my older machine. It was the first machine that was given to me that was my own machine. And I've been using it for this entire project. I do prefer when I'm free motion quilting to quilt on my big Bernina because it has an extra wide throat. That's more space here to move the quilt through. But I want to show you that you truly can make this quilt from start to finish on a standard, even an older machine. So we're continuing on. I'm changed out the top thread. I'm using a Wonderfil 12 weight, which is a lovely thicker thread. It's really going to sit on top of the quilt and you're really going to be able to see it, which is great for this video. Often for videos, I'll put in a brighter color thread for quilting so that you can see it. But since I'm actually quilting on my finished quilt, I don't want to do that because I don't want to rip out those stitches and I don't want giant red all over this really pretty quilt. So I'm using a white, but I'm using the Wonderfil 12 weight. So it's nice and thick. And that's something that I would use even if I wasn't doing the video. I love the 12 weight. I'm going to change out this foot. For the other video, I used a walking foot, and so I changed out the foot for that. For this one, I'm just going to unscrew, lift up, and remove. This is just standard presser foot that I had on here. I can just tuck that away. I'm going to put in place some kind of embroidery or free motion foot. This is the foot that I have for this machine. It'll look different for different machines. So this one is clear, and the hole, if you can see, is kind of an oval shape. This is the one that I use on my Bernina, and it's completely metal and the hole is round. What's important is the way that it interacts with the feed dogs, that it's got this smaller space, that it's got a smaller hole area for the needle to come through. Go to your sewing machine store and ask for an embroidery or free motion foot and they'll know what to give you. So I'm going to lift up this presser foot and tuck this under here and then just screw it on. Nice and tight. Double check that it's on right and that your needle is going in the right place. My needle is actually over to the side and that's because I was doing a zigzag. So I need to adjust my needle position and make sure that I'm not using a zigzag stitch anymore. I've got it back on a straight stitch. The stitch length isn't really going to matter because we're going to be moving this around ourselves. Some people like to put their stitch length on 0. Some people just like to keep it standard. It's really up to you. And then what we need to do is we need to lower the feed dogs. That's in a different spot on different machines. On this machine, it's right down here. And there's a little lever that I need to move over. And what that does is it takes these feed dogs down here and it hides them underneath. They'll still move because it's part of the machine's mechanics, but they won't lift up high enough to interact with the fabric and move it because free motion quilting means that we're moving the quilt. Bring your quilt onto your work area. If you have an extended work area, that's fantastic because anytime the quilt gets pulled down, it creates drag and that gravity actually makes it harder for you to move the quilt underneath. You'll find that more with larger quilts. With a small quilt like this, it's not going to be a big deal. Then we need to decide where we want to get started with our design. We're going to do a simple all over design on the whole quilt. It's one of the designs that I show in my free motion quilting video where I show 8 quilting designs with one simple motion. And this is my favorite, most basic meander on that design. And it's just E's and O's loop-de-loops. We need to start in a corner and you can actually start off the quilt if you like. We're going to bring the thread down and up and then pull up that bobbin thread. And the reason we're doing that is because we don't want the bobbin thread to become a big tangle on the back. And if you were starting somewhere in the middle of your quilt, doing this would allow you to tie off your threads. We're just doing it on the edge and pulling up that bobbin thread. Now I can come over to a corner, put my presser foot down, and I can get started. Sometimes starting on a corner is a little trickier. Sometimes it's easier to start somewhere in the middle of your quilt. It's up to you. You can give it a shot. Also, I recommend if this is your first time free motion quilting, make a scrap sandwich. Scrap piece of fabric on the bottom, scrap piece of batting on top, scrap piece of fabric on top of that, spray baste them together to make a scrap sandwich, and then get some feel for your machine and how you move the fabric before you go onto your quilt, because it's such a pain to pick out stitches from your quilt. So let's go ahead and get started. Give it a couple stitches and just start moving your quilt. I'm just making loopy loops. You want to make sure as you quilt that sometimes you go off the edge of the fabric, so that way when you put your binding on, you're not trying to put your binding on with a big flappy loose border here. So every now and then you want to go off the edge of this fabric, and that helps tack down the edge. Some quilters will say that you need to start on the middle of your quilt, that you can't start on an edge like this, but we spray basted this all together and it's really secure. So I'm okay moving in a corner and working out. With pin basting, you definitely want to work on them in the middle and go out, but this is so securely tacked that it's totally fine going in a corner. However, if you're nervous or you're a beginner, you can absolutely feel free to start in the middle. I'm going to say this is okay. So now I'm just going to go ahead and get this whole quilt quilted. Here you can see that my thread broke. I was going too fast, I pulled that thread too hard, and I snapped the thread. So I'm going to pull up the thread a little bit, and I like going to an intersection where this knot is going to be hidden fairly well, like right here at this cross. And then I'm going to pull up my bobbin thread. Now I don't think my bobbin thread broke, so I'm going to pull this up a little bit, and then it's going to come up the rest of the way on its own. There, I'm pulling it up a little bit, and then you can see it's got a lot of tug there. So I'm going to go ahead and just cut that bobbin thread, pull the rest back down so it's out of my way. And now I have two threads. I'm going to take these two threads and just tie a double knot. And then I can take these threads and thread them on a needle. So I have the needle threaded, and I've tucked it into that same hole where the thread is coming out, and I'm putting it between the two layers. So it's not going all the way to the back, it's just in that batting. And then I can bring it back up to the top and pull it through. I can tug a little bit to make sure that that knot goes into the back. And then with my scissors, cut it flush with the fabric, and it buries right in. And so that's how you bury thread. Now I can do the same thing with my starting thread, but because this is right here at an intersection and it's going to be fairly hidden, it's easier for me to start at the beginning, and that way I don't have to tie a knot here. I can just start over here on the side and then keep going without having to tie another knot. So we'll go ahead and do that. Here's the quilt completely quilted, and you can see what great texture free motion quilting gives. It kind of ties the whole thing together. While walking foot quilting helps stitch everything down like we need, free motion quilting helps stitch everything down and stitch all those layers together, but also gives great texture, which is just my favorite part. So now we just need to square it up. We're going to do this the exact same way we did with the walking foot video, where we line everything up. It should be at 1 3/4 inches if everything is still all square. So there's one side. And you need to make sure this bottom is lined up. Now, if you can see here, the batting shows up just a little right up here. It can show up about 1/8 of an inch, and that's okay, but this is actually more than 1/8 of an inch, so I need to trim this up closer. Just means that the quilt got pulled a little bit out of square as it got quilted, which can happen when you have like a big free all over design like this, it's very tight. It sucks up some of that fabric, and it's not a big deal. I'm just going to trim off a little bit extra, making sure to keep my corners square. And it looks like I just need to trim off maybe 1/8 of an inch. So it's really not a huge concern. So I've trimmed off that scrap. And now I just have the teeniest bit showing. And that's going to just get hidden away in the binding. Totally fine. Not a problem. Let me square up these other two sides. And there we go. The quilt is all trimmed up. Yay! Our quilt is all quilted and ready for binding, which is what we're going to do next week. I'm so glad you joined me for this video today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below. Remember to give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video. And as always, make sure you're subscribed to this channel so you get all of my crafty updates. We have so much more fun in store. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.